I'm Heather Baker and I teach fourth and fifth grade at K Beach. I am on the leadership team for the Champs, and I'm going to talk to you today about asset-based pandemic mindset and vocabulary changes. So we're going to talk about new research, the strength-based discussion mindsets, and specific vocab and phrases to use with students. And essentially, we're taking that idea that our students are missing something and focusing instead on their assets and what they have and where they're coming from. So what learning have your students accomplished this last year? And that should be one of our biggest starting points. Focusing on the fact that our students did learn things last year, even though it was maybe non-traditional or not what we expected. And so starting from that point of asking students, what did you learn? What have you accomplished in the last year would be a great place for us to start our teaching this year. Changing the mindset from what students missed to what is unfinished. So when we talk to our students, instead of talking about what learning they missed in the previous years, or when talking to parents, instead of focusing on missing learning or concepts that weren't addressed, we're focusing on the fact that they're unfinished, that the point that they left off in is where we are picking up and moving forward from. And that idea of unfinished means that we can continue to grow and progress exactly where we are. If you take a minute to talk to your staff, your colleagues, your students about what unexpected learning they had in the last year, you're going to find that it's huge. Whether it's that our students learned how to use technology in ways they never expected, whether they developed personal skills for organization and self-management, whether they learned how to be comfortable talking on a camera or public speaking in groups in ways that they never expected. There's a whole breadth of knowledge that came to students that was unexpected. And some of it may be as simple as our kids who have always said they want to homeschool might not necessarily want that anymore. They might be grateful for being in the building and for having that social emotional connection that they were missing in previous years. So thinking about that learning outside of the box that we necessarily put it in with math and reading and building it to say that there's a lot more that our students took away in the last year with empathy and compassion and other pieces than what we necessarily thought. So we need to take a minute to praise ourselves, to praise educators as a whole, because they made some amazing accomplishments in the last year. The teacher expertise has grown significantly. You guys set up online platforms. You learned how to use Google Drive. You learned how to use slides and docs and share with kids and assess in untraditional ways. And those are huge accomplishments. So as teachers, you grew and your tool belt is much bigger than it was in previous years. We also learned how to give students access to technology in so many different ways than they had accessed in the past. We learned how to support families who didn't have technology, families who didn't have means to be working one-on-one with students, families that just needed to know how to provide structure for their kids when they were learning from home. These ways that we learned to communicate with families was huge in the last year. It allowed us to do things that we've always talked about needing to do from the teacher in the classroom mindset to actually putting into practice big ways of involving our families in student learning. We are identifying and addressing the learning gaps and the unfinished learning where students are and where they're taking off. And we're able to see that in different lenses than we were. And we were rethinking assessment. Assessment in the way that we had traditionally done it in the classroom didn't work last year. And so we had to find new and different ways to assess kids. And those have become some very productive and enjoyable parts of our practice now. And so those are accomplishments that we should be proud of. So some of the studies that are coming out that are really addressing what we were looking at focused on the fact that kids were participating. They did still maintain a high morale as far as being able to work through these dilemmas and get us going in this COVID mindset. But the biggest one that I think we take away here is this idea that students rated COVID teaching highly because they liked the freedom and flexibilities to work at their own pace and their own schedule, their own comfort at home. There was no travel to and from school, and they had more time for non-school activities, less stress, and fewer distractions. And I think that's a big takeaway for us, because with the kids coming back to the classroom, those are the things that they valued in the last year, and they're the things that we need to figure out how we can bring over in to our classrooms this year. How do we give them that freedom? How do we give them that flexibility and that choice and that student ownership in what they're doing now? This one you guys can come back to. It's in the slideshow, so you can really come back to it. But really looking at that John Hattie research in this last year, which a bunch of the other presentations you're going to see are going to really dive into that. And it's focusing on this idea that if we focus on the lack of learning, that perception fuels our conversations, and that conversation, if we say lack of learning, creates a negative deficit mindset, and that deficit mindset will continue to grow, and it will continue to push our kids farther and farther behind, and will continue to drive that gap to be big because we're wording it in that way. And so we need to change that narrative to say, what are we going to do to accelerate student learning? What are we going to do to get behind our students and really promote the idea that their unfinished learning needs to pick up wherever they were and continue moving them forward? That accelerated mindset and that shift to that, we're going to pick up where we are and move forward, no matter where it is. If your kid is 9 and in 4th grade, or if they're a 1st grader, moving beyond that to say wherever they are academically is where we need to move forward now. And that change from deficit thinking to accelerated thinking is going to make all the difference in the world for our kids. The news, the media, the community, our parents, they're all talking about this idea of a COVID slide. We're taking a vulnerable population that's already at risk, and we're putting them at an even greater risk when we do that. So this idea that we need to change the narrative, we need to change this word COVID slide to something different, to something positive, is crucial for our kids, especially our marginalized populations. When you're looking at the rating for what actually impacts the positive impact on kids, you're going to look at this piece right here, that anything over that 0.4 is going to be big. And this idea of acceleration, this idea of thinking about it in that way, is almost a 0.7. So it's really showing how high that acceleration mindset is on impacting our kids for a positive shift forward. I think this fact is just something that we should all take a minute and really think about. 40% of instructional minutes are spent teaching students things they already know. I think this was a mind-blowing moment for me when I read this statistic and we were presenting it. And it was this idea that, yeah, we pre-assess and we keep moving, but we kind of tend to have we're teaching what we're teaching, and we're teaching to that whole group mindset, and we're addressing everyone. But 40% of our time is students already know the material, then we're not using that time effectively. And so really looking at that pre-assessment, where are kids? And if they know it, move them forward. Put them into the next chapter. Don't make them sit through something they already know. Use that time effectively. So this idea then becomes one that just takes off. The revolutionary idea in education is that active student involvement in their learning is giving breakthrough results, giving them that ownership to make choice. And it doesn't have to be huge choices. Start with baby choices. When they take ownership, when they make a choice, when they have a role in their learning and get to choose what they're doing and the pathways and the outcomes and the assessments, it has breakthrough results. We tend to have a mindset of what a good student is. We tend to think of good students as someone who knows the answer, someone who completes tasks, follows our classroom rules that we've put on them for you must do this and you must do that. And so this idea that maybe, just maybe, we might want to think about that a little bit differently. We might want to move that mindset to an active role instead of a passive role. So instead of a student who is following the rules, completing tasks the way we want it done and knowing the answers, maybe they're assessment capable. Maybe they're seeking feedback to understand and to grow. Maybe they're that A student that wants to go above and beyond and is continuing to ask you how they get better. How do they grow? How do they get to the next step? It doesn't have to be the A student either. It could be the student who's getting those middle grades but wants to get better and is fighting to figure out how they take the next step from the feedback that you are providing. So the quality of the teacher and teaching is the most important controllable factor that impacts our student learning. So this is coming back from that Hattie research, and this is coming back to that idea that you as a teacher and your teaching and your belief in your students is going to impact them. And when we look at that collective teacher efficacy, you are off the charts. You are a 1.39. So when we talked about that 0.4 being kind of the benchmark of like what was going to be a zone of desired effects for our kids, you are off the charts at a 1.39. So that collective responsibility is then what's linked to our student achievement. Getting behind your students, giving them the ownership in this, allowing them to take that role in what we're doing, getting behind them to tell them that their learning is unfinished and we're picking up where they are and we're moving forward and we're going to accelerate learning in their terms where they are is going to give them that success. This is a slide that's here and it's available for you, and it's the staff language that's available. So instead of hearing learning loss, talk about a lack and a loss of opportunity to learn, an unrealized potential, and really working on changing what we're saying to be something positive and encouraging. And this resource can be found on the district website, and it's also linked in our presentation so that you'll have this entire piece. And it's good to have on hand, especially when you're talking to parents. This is just the continuation of that. And that's all I have for you, because this is the slide for the next presentation. All right, guys, I hope that you're able to take something from this and really think about the fact that our kids are kids and they're growing and they're learning. And this last year put them at very different places. But the more that you personalize for them, the more that you meet them right where they are, the more that you tell them that wherever they are is okay and that they're going to move forward from where they are and that you believe in them, that's going to give them the tools for success. The more that you help our community realize that this is not a time when our kids are lacking learning. This is a time when they are given different learning than what we expected, that they have all these new skills that we didn't know that they would have, and that they are loving being in the classroom so much that right now we're starting from a win point.